What's up, Ego Hackers? I'm C.S. Joseph, and this is the C.S. Joseph Podcast, Private Edition, Season 23, Episode 16, How to Parent INTPs, aka the Engineer, aka the Ardent Archetype. Doing something a little bit different. This is potentially going to be a bit of a somber type lecture because parenting INTPs, while it seems like the most easiest thing in the world, and it's extremely easy for parents to be lazy about parenting INTP children. Oftentimes, they end up doing more harm than good, which can negatively impact literally everybody else in society if they are not careful as a result. And oftentimes, people do not understand, that when it comes to INTP children, that they are literally playing with fire in certain areas. They seem super docile. They seem harmless. They seem like, nothing bad is ever going to happen. But the reality of the situation is a lot of bad can happen if they are not parented properly. Now, granted, the INTP, is often seen as the most brilliant of all the types. I actually maintain the INFP is probably more brilliant than an INTP potentially, but it's neither here nor there. They're both super high judging functions, and I could really argue both ways. Although INTP children are often, accused or labeled or mislabeled for being autistic, even though they're not actually autistic. And that is one of the most painful aspects of raising an INTP that, as a parent, because you're going to have to consistently defend them. And if you're not there to support an INTP, they're not going to be there to support you. And trust me, you're going to want their support because they have ESFJ subconscious, and the reality of the situation is there is no better support in the entire world other than the support that an INTP can give. However, because of how supportive they can be, and they could be a master of support, that can cause a lot of problems too. And those problems, well, let's just say that they can become very bitter. And they can be so bitter that their bitterness can actually start bleeding into creating negative fate and negative futures for other people, especially society itself. And their own personal bitterness within one individual INTP could literally cause the collapse of society itself if we're not careful. An example of this would be Bill Gates. He's an INTP, and he owns Monsanto, and a lot of people, especially naturopaths, absolutely hate Monsanto as an organization. They're not suable, for example. They're constantly creating vaccines that they can't be sued. I mean, they're basically indemnified, for example. And there's a lot of evidence out there to suggest that, Bill Gates did nothing wrong. And there's a lot of evidence that says that Bill Gates's vaccines end up potentially being harmful to people. Yet he can't be sued. And Monsanto can't be sued, for example. Yeah, a huge philanthropist, but for what purpose, right? And this is a man who follows the teachings of Robert Malthus. Do you really want your child to follow the teachings of Robert Malthus, where the ends justify the means, and that leads to eugenics-related thinking? The majority, or at least the people who have championed eugenics and eugenics-based thinking throughout history, are INTPs. Specifically, they are INTPs. And it comes from T.E. Nemesis. It's not that great, But then again, if they aren't bitter, if they're not embittered, especially embittered by their childhood, they become amazing people. They can make huge contributions, like the theory of relativity or Jungian analytical psychology. Jungian analytical psychology, this form of psychology that I get to talk to you folks about right now, wasn't originated from me. It was originated from an INTP named Carl Jung, right? It came from him, right? So when it comes to INTPs, they either make zero contribution whatsoever, and they spend all of their attention on themselves and become insanely hedonistic, or they end up destroying society and destroying the future of society, or they end up causing society to prosper in an amazing way. And these are like the different pathways that your INTP child can go, and it's really important to be aware of those different pathways, because if not, that's going to cause a lot of issues. It's going to cause let's just say that you know every time something bad happens to your INTP child, they're never going to forget it. They're never going to forget the face of the person that punched them for like the rest of their life, for example. They're always going to have, and bitterness continues to be an issue too, because that bitterness will cause them to seek unfair justice out on other people. And that bitterness could also make them feel entitled to justice. This is where the statement, where my former INTP friend, he's actually still my friend. We're actually going to be having lunch in 2 weeks, now that I think about it. I invited him to lunch because I'm going to California. I'm going to be visiting California for a while, so I'm going to be hanging out with my good friend. But he taught me about how his father listened to his brother over him, because his brother broke a window and then blamed the INTP, him, my friend, blamed him, and his father took off his belt and was going to beat him, even though he didn't break the window. So what did my friend do? He went over to another window and broke that window too, and then looked at his dad and said, well, if I'm going to do the time, I may as well do the crime, right? So that kind of thinking, or why bother syndrome, right? That can also happen with an INTP. Another thing that INTPs do, they allow themselves to get very, very loyal to somebody, but then they will betray that person if that person, and they can become too controlling over that person with their ENTJ shadow, and then they'll end up betraying that person and pulling all their support out from that person. And that's not exactly just, right? I've had it happen to me multiple times, specifically because people start complaining to the INTP, then the INTP starts assuming that I'm harming people, even though I'm not, right? And they also lack the life experience for them to be able to make that judgment, and they're always going off what other people are telling them because of SC Trickster, and they're just listening to everyone's individual experience to the point where they will listen to anyone's complaint whatsoever without actually verifying whether or not the complaint is even legitimate or justified to begin with. And then they'll defend that person. And then as a result of defending that person, they will pull the chair out from under that person, which can be a big problem and insanely destructive. Or the absolute worst, you have revenge. INTPs can be insanely vengeful because they end up having this attitude of, well, I built this whole system for the company. They're not giving me any recognition, and they're going to fire me. So I'm going to put a logic bomb to go off 1 year after I get fired, and then it will completely destroy the systems that I made for this company, and the company will go under. I was actually called in the middle of the night as an emergency engineer to get on site to assist that situation as a result of that INTP employee going rogue. And this actually happened to a Behringer Music Group in Kirkland, Washington. They had their IT systems completely wiped out. And then Uli Behringer brought us in, and I had to fix it, everything. And we did get to a point where we were fixing it, and we were bringing everything they had back. They got lucky because the logic bomb that went off in their system and took them out, well, it did not format their storage arrays. And because of that, I was able to bring back their virtual machines by reformatting or taking their VMDK flat files, recreating new VMDKs, and then taking an old RV Tools dump in a spreadsheet and hand-built their servers and brought them back. It was an extremely egregious job that, oh, by the way, Uli Behringer didn't even pay for, because after it was all over, Mr. Philosopher himself, oh, I didn't sign a contract with you. You just helped me out of the kindness of your own heart, blah, blah, blah. Never paid. And the company I was working for ended up suing him. They paid me, luckily, but they had to take a $50,000 loss, which is really sad. Anyway. But hey, his company exists, and I guess he was a very shrewd philosopher, right? In terms of his business dealings, right? But that's the kind of damage that an INTP can do. There's also other INTPs out there, and bitterness is one thing, but bitterness can really form if there's a lack of human connection that INTPs are not having with other human beings. So they end up seeing human beings potentially as playthings, basically, and systems as playthings. And this is where you get people like Kevin Mitnick. Kevin Mitnick is the most famous hacker of all time. He's the only hacker, other than potentially Edward Snowden, to have hacked the National Security Agency, all as a result of social engineering. He used a method called phone phreaking. That was his primary method of hacking or social engineering. He is often hailed as the father of social engineering. He wrote books like The Art of Intrusion, The Art of Invisibility, The Art of Deception, Ghost in the Wires. All of these books that anyone and everyone should read to understand just how easy it is to actually get your credit card number. Super easy. He's the guy that would call Blockbuster Video and pretend to be a manager of another Blockbuster video and ask for a specific customer's credit card information because they were standing there right in front of him, but they didn't have, but his system was down, pretending his system was down. And the other manager at the other store, even though he himself wasn't a manager, literally told Kevin the guy's credit card number over the phone. It's easy. It's extremely easy. And that's what can also happen if you don't raise your INTP child properly. They have this ends justify the means attitude. They are the most unsupportive person you've ever met. They are extremely bitter. And they can also be extremely hedonistic to the point where they are consistently dealing with dopamine addiction, dealing with and very addictive personality, and addicted to video games, addicted to pornography, heavily addicted to pornography in some of the biggest ways. I know a few INTPs, and in some cases INFPs, who ended up having child pornography. We had one such person in my family who had child pornography, and he's in jail now as a result, which is shocking. And honestly, I'm glad he's not in the family anymore. That was it's pretty rough. Had a lot of it is a rough story, really, really rough story for my family on my dad's side. But anyway, these are the kinds of people that will end up happening if you do not raise your INTP properly. And there's other really great people that INTPs can be. They can be amazing at IT systems. They can be awesome theoretical mathematicians, theoretical thinkers, originators of thought, systems producers, systems creators, systems implementers. They're just masters of systems. Amazing when it comes to developing software and the like. And it's always just amazing to watch their ingenuity because they are all ingenious. They are very all ingenious, and that is basically where their genius comes from if they are allowed to apply themselves. The difference is that they can become the worst examples of what an INTP is if they are basically starved for recognition, starved for appreciation, and ultimately starved for socialization. However, there's an even greater risk. Because they have introverted sensing child, an INTP child has an additional problem that goes along with it. And it's called the tabula rasa, also known as clean slate. So INP children, but INTPs can very, very much be molded into anything they want. If you have an INTP child put into the foster care system, it is extremely easy, for example, for that INTP child to be conditioned into doing anything. Conditioned into being a child soldier, which they often are. Conditioned into being a sex slave, which they often are, right? It's so easy to condition an SI child. Extremely easy because they literally are a blank slate and they cling so much to their comfort zone that they are often not willing to learn new things for the sake of their comfort, basically, unless they absolutely, absolutely have to or are forced to do it. And because of that, they can end up being extremely ignorant, or they can be extremely loyal to the wrong things. They could be loyal to their abusers. I was molested as a child, and I was very loyal to my abusers, extremely codependent and extremely loyal. I was actually seeking abuse from them. I wanted them to abuse me sexually, and I would seek that from them consistently. And then all of a sudden one day I started to say no. I started to say no to my abusers, but then one of them's like, "Well, you're going to get over it." And then like I wouldn't do it, and then they decided to start publicly shaming me because they're an ISFP. And they started publicly shaming me to some neighbor kids, which were basically all the kids at the bus stop, basically. And then like I ended up having like this huge reputation in school for being the sexual deviant when I was in fifth grade or fourth grade, fourth and fifth grade, basically. Everyone would shun me consistently because like this whole rumor, which was technically actually true, was being spread about me because of, what my cousin decided to, because she was effectively blackmailing me and I called her bluff, and then she decided to publicly shame me via blackmail as a result, right? You know, but it's way worse for an INTP. Now, an INTP doesn't care about blackmail so much because they're willing to take the hit and they can handle it. But the difference is that it will decrease their socialization as a child. And then and having that decreased socialization will cause them to become bitter and closer to some of the more negative expressions of the INTP archetype in people instead of some of the more positive expressions. Another positive expression would be Bobby Fischer, an amazing chess player. Brilliant guy. I think Red Pollard, the horse racer, also an INTP. There's plenty of them out there. Amazing INTPs who are absolutely brilliant and have changed the world or have these huge feats of strength or these feats of genius throughout their lives that really make a difference. For example, Einstein's theory of relativity was recently proved. It was proved in 2020 officially. Even though when he first started talking about it in the 1900s, the early 1900s, he was completely shunned by the scientific community. And it was finally physically proven with concrete evidence in the year 2020. And that's how long it took. Long after his death, for example. But this is the potential that your INTP child has. The problem is you got to be really, really careful about how you do it. So, first thing is first. Let's discuss what Jungian parenting actually is. So Jungian parenting is got a few things to it. First thing is a rule. Everyone is responsible for parenting people. Everyone has a parent function. It's everyone's responsibility to parent other people. If you see a child acting like way out of line in public, it's your job to say something. Call their parents out if necessary. I don't care if it creates conflict. I don't care if you're not their parent, because it's perhaps that their parents don't even know what they're doing, or they're ignorant and would actually like some help, or whatever. And if not, you could still say, well, they're bothering me and they're bothering everyone else. So what do you want me to do? What do you want me to say? But at least be honest with each other, folks. Honesty is the best policy when it comes to parenting. Because if you're not going to honestly parent, then you're not going to have honest results in your child. You're more likely to have like a liar as a child, right? You're more likely to have one of the greatest hackers in history as your child. Is that really what you want? So let's examine that just a little bit. So oftentimes when INTPs are, like in public, they're very behind the scenes and whatnot, but them clinging to behind the scenes can also be extremely detrimental. And sometimes, like for example, I was at a party earlier today, and I saw a bunch of behind the scenes background types, at this party, just trying to like not be noticed. And I would literally stand right next to them, look at them in the eye, and loudly say, "What are you doing trying to not be noticed?" And completely pull them out of the comfort zone with my expert sensing demon, specifically because I knew exactly what they were doing. And then all of a sudden they started to contribute and then started to socialize, right? That's an example of me parenting somebody else, in public. Everyone has to do this, and it's important that we do it from obviously the perspective of the mature masculine and the perspective of the mature feminine both of them. Now, the mature masculine, granted, is more like a cult. It's the cult of the mature masculine, where fellow men initiate other men into higher levels of knowledge and knowing, and they go through various rites of passage to be able to like climb this ladder within the mature masculine. And the number one rule of the mature masculine is don't screw another man's woman. That's the number one rule of the mature masculine, and it has to be respected. Imagine what the world would be like if men respected other men to the point where they wouldn't screw other men's women at all. Life would be a lot different, right? And then you can look at the mature feminine, the cartel of the mature feminine, which exists to help women through their various phases in life. It's not a ladder, it's more like a phase going in and out, and your INTP child needs to be subjected to this. The number one goal or rule of the cartel of the mature feminine is, as a woman, do not give yourself away so cheaply, even if you yourself feel cheap. Do not do that, because in doing so, you are screwing your other gender. Or put simply, for both mature masculine and mature feminine, don't screw over or harm your fellow gender. That's a more basic rule that everyone should be following. However, INTPs, regardless of their gender, they're not so aware of this. And you see it consistently all the time. And it's because they are that clean slate. They are that tabula rasa. If they don't have the mature masculine or the mature feminine right there in their face, ready to influence them, then you're going to have something horrible in your hands. Your male INTP son will become what women call an incel, or an involuntary celibate, for sure. And you won't get grandchildren. That's a thing. Okay, especially with INTP men. And then the INTP woman version is they can't take care of themselves. Their self-discipline is terrible. They've let their bodies go. They can be very unhealthy and just be effectively, couch potatoes and going on their dopamine fixes consistently, and not actually like care about contributing, to a man or to their men, etc., which can be a serious problem as well. Do you really want that for your children? Is that kind of the goal that you're going for? Is that really the direction that when your INTP child was born, was that really the dreams that you had for your child? Well, the answer is obviously no. So perhaps you should go in a different direction then and parent them appropriately. I mean, that would be nice. That would be effective, I think. So let's examine that a little bit longer. How do we do that? How do we actually get a good INTP child, a good outcome for an INTP child, from a parenting standpoint? Well, remember, according to Jungian parenting, there are two phases. The first phase is childhood, and the second phase is adolescence. In the first phase, you need to focus on developing their inferior function, because it's the only time you as a parent will ever be able to do that, and their inferior function will be developed. And it's during their childhood. But as soon as they hit adolescence, you can't touch the inferior function anymore, because the ego protects itself, because the parent function is starting to develop and the superego is fully formed. And as a result, the ego will protect itself, so you can't touch that inferior function anymore. They have to develop it on their own and for themselves. And during adolescence, you got to help them develop their parent function. The problem is that, again, it's in their ego, and that's also hard to do. So you have to go through the cognitive orbit through the critic function, because the critic function will influence the parent function, since it is the back door to the parent function. But so you do it that way, and then all of a sudden they start being a little bit more effective, right? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what an INTP in childhood looks like in terms of some of their behaviors, but how to actually parent them properly when they're in their childhood phase. When they're in their childhood phase, they're super behind the scenes. They don't want to be exposed. They can be a little bit more fearful, right? And I get that, INTP women or girls often are, kind of coddled in that way, and that's fine. And sometimes even boys by their mothers can also be coddled in that way. But you got to not coddle them. Not at all. I think the best way, the most direct way to put it for developing INTP FE inferior is you have to force them to socialize against their will. You have to force them to participate. Forced participation, forced socialization, forced extracurricular activities, right? Forced contributions, forced volunteering. You don't give them a choice. You tell them you have to do this and you are going to do this. I'm going to do it too, and you will do it and you will do it well. And if you don't, then I'm going to take away your privileges. Most INTP children absolutely love all of their dopamine sources. Nintendo Switch, for example, Xbox, ooh, especially, some of the boys, they love them some Call of Duty, right? Cell phones. I watched an INTP kid playing PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, PUBG, on a phone, and I'm like, how do you do that? And I'm like, dang, I must be getting old. You know what I'm saying? It's just amazing that you could play those first-person shooters on phones now. I just think that's that even like the AAA games, you could do that. And I'm just like, wow, like, why do we even need consoles anymore? We could just have it all on our phones. Who cares, right? So it's things like that, right? They love their dopamine sources, their Netflix, their movies. They love movies constantly. Any form of media or content, because no one consumes content more than an INTP. Absolutely nobody consumes content. So as a result of that content consumption, you literally have to take away their privilege to consume. And in fact, it's extremely healthy for you to do this with your INTPs. It's like, hey, if you want to earn this back, you can earn this privilege of getting your little dopamine fix, but you have to do a bunch of volunteer work, or you have to go do Cub Scouts or Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts or something. You have to do something, and you have to force them to do it. INTPs who are extremely mature in life, especially in adulthood, like my friend Angelo, he is an amazing outdoorsman. And I've never met an INTP outdoorsman before. He's got his own tent on top of his car, on top of his Subaru. He's constantly camping all the time, constantly fishing. He's having a great time, always doing all the things, doing literally everything there is to do. And I'm just like, wow, that's incredible. Absolutely incredible. So based on that, like, it's just kind of shocking to me, like how effective he is. And he has every little inch, and he's created all these amazing survival systems with his car or his backpacking gear or everything, and he understands it completely, and he uses that as his vehicle to socialize, and he socializes with a lot of friends. He also helps them, provides them with a support structure, and in some cases he's actually been there to be like a medic in the field to help people out when they're injured, especially in the outdoors. A fantastic human being who I have great respect for. The issue is, though, is that not all INTPs get that way because, they're too busy playing Call of Duty constantly. And then it's so sad to me to watch like these parents just constantly enabling their INTP child by getting them the next version of Call of Duty and like not really, challenging them in terms of people. Because INTPs, let's be honest, I'm not saying that they are the type who has the worst social skills. I could argue my type probably has the worst social skills. Probably. Although they have FE child. But, I don't know, SE Demon can get in there. It's debatable. But INTPs certainly look like, at least they're colloquially accepted as one of the 16 types that does have the worst social skills. And that can present a big problem. And it really comes from their extroverted feeling inferior because they are just afraid about how other people feel. They are afraid of other people's value judgments. They desperately want other people to value them and give them recognition and show them gratitude for their contributions. But if you don't teach your child how to contribute to others via forced contribution, forced socialization, forced activities, forced extracurricular activities, forced outdooring, forced scouting, forced this, forced that, forced martial arts. Holy crap, get into martial arts. If you're not doing this consistently for your INTP, they're not going to have any experience with which they can contribute. You have to shove contribution-based experiences down their throats immediately. Show your INTP, I don't care their gender, show them how to sew. Show them how to dress a wound. Show them how to perform first aid. Show them how to fix a computer. and then a lot of INTPs gravitate towards technology because technology is the source of their dopamine fix. That's why. Look, I became an engineer specifically so I could hack computers, so I could put games on those computers, even though those computers were not designed to have games on them. My dad had a very old Windows 95 monorail brand computer, which my dad thought was the greatest thing in the world. It was horrible. And I hacked that thing. I hacked every computer he had to be able to install like various game emulators and whatnot. I got to play Chrono Trigger on SNES emulator because I couldn't buy it myself because I was too poor to buy it in 1995 when it came out, and then it was discontinued and I couldn't buy it anymore, and it was just horrible. And Chrono Trigger is like the best video game of all time. Let's be honest. I'm sure many INTPs here would agree with me. And if you have not played Chrono Trigger, then what the hell are you doing with your life? It's an amazing experience if you have the patience to get through it. But anyway, the point is that like that's why INTPs end up getting into technology. But you can't allow your INTP child to get into things specifically because that thing is their dopamine fix. That their dopamine fix is like their idol. It's their drug. And it is extremely hard to break an INTP of dopamine addiction. The only way you could do that is through fasting. They have to fast from all sources of dopamine for at least 14 days. 14 days. And then after they fasted from dopamine, their brain chemistry will change. And they'll actually be a lot healthier mentally. And they'll actually be more prepared for socialization, because when they're on getting their dopamine fix, it's their TI hero and their SI child in a cognitive loop, basically. And it's like, I know I want this experience. I know I want to taste that. I know I want to do this. I want to, I know I want to have that experience. And they'll just keep doing it to themselves over and over and over again and keep reliving the same thing over and over again. Do you know how hard it is to break an INTP of a heroin or cocaine addiction? It is so hard. Like, INTPs love them some uppers, and in some cases some downers. I know a few INTP drunks, but it's usually uppers they go for. They love them some stims, right? You do not want your INTP to get to that point. You can prevent that through proper socialization. The problem is that socialization too can carry a risk. Because socialization, while it can be good, it can also be dangerous because socialization can still be based on ignorance, for example. Like, for example, socialization in Western society teaches young boys that they have to grow up to earn women, which is a complete lie and false, right? That's an example of poor socialization. Or, for example, that boys have to, they get conditioned that they have to earn a lot of money in order to have women in their life. That is BS. And as much as, girls are conditioned that they have to wear makeup to get boys, also false. Money is to makeup as, or money is to boys as much as makeup is to girls in that regard. Like they're kind of the same. And I'm quoting W. Anton when I say that, right? Also another book that your INTP child will need to understand or read, regardless of gender, in my opinion, the work of W. Anton. Because they're the most easily conditioned, and out of everybody in society, they need to have their conditioning broken. Imagine the kind of man that Bill Gates would be if he was able to break his conditioning. Oh wait, that's right. He'd be more like Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a man who I maintain has definitely broken his societal conditioning. At least broken himself from the negative aspects of his socialization. But the thing is, regardless of positive or negative, there will always be something being imprinted upon your INTP child, and you cannot stop it. So what you need to do is constantly be imprinting new things, new experiences. Don't let them get stuck in their comfort zone. They need to have variety thrown at them constantly. But do it in such a way where they are learning so that they can contribute to others, or they are actively contributing to others while they are learning, right? That's another huge issue, right? There's actually an ESFJ father who had an INTP son, and they don't like each other very much. Polar opposites, very negative situation. But he made his son go with them to firefighter training and and all the firefighting events. And then all of a sudden his INTP son became a volunteer firefighter, and this guy is amazing, and he could just keep going and going and going, and he could like literally work for like 20 hours straight and save lives and be a total badass, etc., because of that insane endurance that they have, all because his ESFJ father forced him to go have firefighting related experiences. Even when there was a huge forest fire out there, it got to a time where his son was of age, but he wasn't really doing anything in his life except playing Call of Duty at home. And he's like, son, we're going to go save people. Let's go. And then they drove out to California during some of the worst fires of the last couple of years, and were out there on the front lines. And his son became a volunteer firefighter, and because of that contributions, he got recognized in his community. And then he also ended up meeting a very nice NJ woman, and they're married with children now. A fantastic fellow. And he's an engineer. I mean, he's not a firefighter full time. He just has those skills, etc. So again, you remember, anyone, society will definitely imprint upon your INTP, but you want to make sure that you're not too late. You got to make sure that you are the one imprinting on your INTP sooner than later. Either way, these things are incredibly important. The other reason why socialization is really necessary, and being exposed to an insane amount of different forms of socialization, is because this will provide your INTP with the social skills that they need. If your INTP does not have social skills, they will have a horrifying midlife crisis, an extremely horrifying midlife crisis. The kind of midlife crisis that could lead to suicide, the kind of midlife crisis that could lead to death in some capacity, the death of themselves, the death of other people. It can be absolutely devastating because they will react with all of the bitterness that's stored within their SI child, and it will be all poured out at a single moment. It is literally Vegeta going Super Saiyan for the very first time. Why do I mention that? Because in the anime Dragon Ball Z, which most INTP boys actually end up liking and watching, etc., and Goku, his rival, is an ESFJ, for example, but Vegeta, he fell behind. He fell behind Goku. He was the prince of his people. He's part of a master alien race, a very powerful alien race. He is one of the last survivors of his race and of his species, and he sees his rival Goku being better than him. And then he was trying so hard and trained so hard and put everything he had into straight up effort into trying to become the Super Saiyan, basically. And he just couldn't do it. He couldn't complete the transformation. And it got to the point where he's just like, he ended up becoming so apathetic, so extremely apathetic to the idea of even becoming a Super Saiyan, he just decided that I don't care anymore. And he just became so angry over how he just didn't care about becoming a Super Saiyan anymore. And then as soon as he let go of it, that's at the very moment where he himself actually transformed, and he made the transformation and became a whole new level of strength that he never had before, right? That is what it is like for all INTPs out there because of apathy. And apathy is really as a result of introverted sensing bitterness, because when they start getting bitter, they just want to tolerate everything. They just want to endure everything. They think that they can outlast everything. And for the most part, they're right. They can outlast 4 out of 5 things in life. That's technically accurate. That is a true thing. They can outlast most stuff. The problem is that they'll become apathetic to healthy, good things in their life instead of the bad things. And also that apathy can also keep them stuck in abusive situations, abusive relationships, because they've been conditioned. Even if they're a 40-year-old INTP, that INTP can still be conditioned, folks. They can still be conditioned. And INP children are the weakest to conditioning. And if you don't properly provide them socialization and give them those social skills, they will lack the tools, the mental tools, to challenge unhealthy conditioning from external sources, be it society or their families or their wives or their husbands, their pimp, who knows, their drug dealer, who knows. All of those things matter. All of those things are an issue. And if you're not doing it, well, that's what the fate of your child is going to be. But what happens when you do it right? What happens when you're forcing them to contribute? What happens when you're doing proper socialization? Like, the number one priority for your INTP child needs to specifically be, hey, you need to go have relationships with other people. They need to be forced to extrovert and be around people. And then make sure, though, that when they are done what they've done, let them go in their cave or wherever they need to go to be by themselves and recharge. Do not get in the way of their recharging. Sometimes that could be a crossword puzzle. Sometimes that could be Sudoku. It doesn't matter. Like, it could be a Game Boy or Nintendo Switch. Just let them have their little dopamine fix, for their reward. But at the same time, like, it's after they've earned it through socialization. And that socialization will tire them out, and it will tire them out quickly, and they'll hate it. But after a while, they'll be able to endure socialization to the point where they'll actually become some of the more social people you've ever met. And their ESFJ subconscious will develop. And they'll be extremely supportive people. And they'll have the social skills to not become a doormat and allow themselves to be conditioned and become loyal to the wrong people. Instead, they will become loyal to the right people and the right systems, the right organizations. And they will have the social tools to defend their egos from that negative conditioning, that manipulation, that macro Bernaysian social engineering that we talk about within this community. So keep that in mind. It's very necessary to that end. So hopefully you've done that correctly, and your INTP child is now an adolescent. Yay! Congratulations, you, right? Because if you didn't do that correctly, your INTP child as a 14, 15-year-old will go to high school, and the first guy that is interested in her will be like, oh, I value you, or oh, I like you. And then all of a sudden, because he said, I like you, her panties drop instantly. Yeah, that's a thing, just so you know, because FE inferior, saying I like you, is the fastest way to get an ITP's panties to drop, because FE inferior just doesn't hear it that much. The thing is, though, if they have a lot of socialization, if you were socializing your children, your INTP children, they would have a lot of people and a lot of experience in their life built up over time of a bunch of people saying, I like you to them. So then just this random person that they meet in high school saying, I like you, doesn't mean as much to them because they've heard it plenty of times before. It's not as special. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, so what? A lot of other people like me too. Great. You see what I'm saying? And then all of a sudden the panties stay on and those legs are closed and you don't have an abortion on your hands. So let me tell you something. INTP women, at least the ones that I've met, oftentimes, if they're not brought up in religious circles or whatnot, they won't hesitate to have an abortion. And can you as a parent really fathom having, your grandchild being aborted? Some of you can, and I know some of you can't. I know for me, I wouldn't be okay with it, but some people, they are okay with it. But hey, it's your life, I guess. So people just need to realize that there's some extreme consequences to their actions. If you don't parent your child in your childhood, then they're not going to be prepared even for adolescence, and that could be a huge problem. Plus, they're not loyal to these things and have these insane expectations. They're not being super entitled either. I mean, even INTPs could be entitled. They could be entitled to their dopamine fix if you're not careful, right? You're trying to prevent that entitlement. You're also trying to prevent other people from using a dopamine fix, like sexuality, for example, to dangle it as a carrot in front of them, and then they'll just go with that person and then be conditioned by that person to be loyal to that person in an abusive situation. You need to watch out for that constantly. So adolescence is here. What do you have to do? Well, you got to develop their personal responsibility. You got to develop their expert intuition parent, which is them wanting to feel wanted, them wanting to be desirable. And as much as that boy coming to your INTP daughter and being like, "Ooh, I like you," if he also says, "Oh, I want you," at the same time, her parent function is super underdeveloped. Now, at least if she has proper socialization, she may be able to defend against that still and use SI child discipline and endurance and endure that approach. But extrovert intuition parent eventually will crack over time because it's not well developed enough. So then you have to constantly be presenting your INTP children with awareness of consequences. based as a result of their own decisions. The problem is they are afraid. They are afraid of giving themselves, like, they are not really afraid. They're very critical towards allowing themselves to want to do anything, because already they see their peers making a lot of irresponsible decisions. So then they end up adopting this really poor and unhealthy philosophy of, well, if I don't make any decision, then I can't get in trouble, and then I will always be safe. That's not how life works. And that will lead your child down the road to stagnance, and they will stagnate, and they will not even grow. These are the kind of people who will go to school, go to college, get a job after their degree. And as soon as they have a degree, like literally, as soon as they have their degree, they'll stop growing, and they'll just be dopamine for the rest of their life, basically, that you're INTP. Is that really what you want? No, that's not what you want. So instead, I recommend taking it a step further and attacking their NI critic, where you will actually force your INTP to make decisions, and you force them to also live with the consequences. That's how they will learn consequences for their NE parent. And it's like, you make them make a decision. Be like, look, I know the right answer. I'm not going to tell you the right answer. You're going to make a decision, and if you get it right, good on you. If you get it wrong, well, there will be consequences, and you will reap what you sow. That is the one thing you have to teach an INTP. You reap what you sow, right? There will always be blowback. The difference is, the goal is to not avoid sowing in the first place. And that's what INTPs end up rationalizing with their TE nemesis over time, is that they think, well, if I'm not even sowing anything, if I'm not making any decisions, then I'm not going to reap any bad things. But then they're not going to reap any good things either, and then they're just going to stagnate and be worthless human beings who are completely undesirable for the rest of their life. And then they'll be alone. But they're like, I'm okay with being alone. But then you won't get any grandchildren, and then they may let their bodies go and be super unhealthy, and then they'll just end up being this hedonistic burden on society and on their family and people that they know. And then they'll just become bitter as a result, even though it's their own damn fault to begin with. And they'll be blaming everybody else for all of their pain in their life, even though they themselves won't even lift the finger to actually make decisions and live with the consequences. Because the reality of the situation is, the goal is, you have to teach your INTP adolescent that regardless of any consequences they deal with, they can get through it. Therefore, it is wise for them to make decisions, even if they are uncertain about the outcome. Because they're so outcome focused, they're not going to make a decision unless they are guaranteed the outcome they themselves are looking for their SI child, which is actually a form of selfishness. It is a form of entitlement. It's no wonder that INTPs end up being in self-destructive, binging-like behavior after they are out of high school, and they're getting into college and whatnot, because the real world, especially when they join the workforce, they get super depressed because in the real world, they don't have mommy and daddy enabling them in that way, right? Because they realize that, if I just not make any decisions, I don't have to deal with anything. That's NI critic. So you got to go to NI critic, and you have to force them to make decisions, and you have to force them to live with the consequences of their decisions. And you cannot bail them out. And if they make it wrong, that's them. Because the point is that they need to learn that they are tough enough to deal with the pain of whatever those consequences are. Because they'll never learn from other people's mistakes. They can only learn from their own mistakes. Literally, their own mistakes, no one else's mistakes, just their mistakes. Like me, they have to trial and error all the time. And you got to tell them, like, look, hard work always beats talent. So sometimes that hard work is you have to trial and error, which means if you're going to trial and error, you can only learn, little INTP, through trial and error. That's the only way you can learn, is trial and error. And if you're not willing to trial and error through everything, you're not going to get anywhere in life. And in order to get them to be willing to trial and error, they have to make the decision. So while you have them in your home and they're adolescents, you force them to make decisions. So what you do is you present them with a choice. Hey, you have to do an extracurricular activity. Pick one. Well, I don't want to do that. I just want to play Call of Duty. No. You're going to do an extracurricular activity. You don't get a choice. Pick one. Right? That kind of thing, right? You make them do that. Make them make decisions and make them suffer the consequences as a result. If you do that, they will not have quarter-life crisis, and they will end up building a ton of endurance, a ton of steadfastness, right? A ton of perseverance, which will hyper-develop their parent function quickly, which will give them an amazing awareness of consequences to the point where they'll be able to predict the fates of other people, right? Predict the fate and abstract the fate and futures of other people and the decisions of other people. They can even create entire worlds based off it, like George R.R. Martin or Frank Herbert. Frank Herbert's an INTP, for example, right? An amazing INTP, that man. Very famous. Wrote the most famous piece of fiction on planet Earth, Dune. I highly recommend it. Or science fiction, that is. So understand, this is what you must do with your adolescent. The other thing that will happen is that they become extremely desirable. Extremely desirable, especially desirable by the opposite sex, which oftentimes INTPs, men or women, really struggle with being desirable to the opposite sex because they often are the involuntary celibates of the gene pool. It is very common for them. So make them make the decision to go to the gym. Tell them, in their adolescence, hey, you have to go exercise. Hey, you have to measure your food. You get to pick how you do it, but you're going to do it. You have to count your calories. You have to know exactly how much protein, fat, and carbohydrates you're going to eat, for example. Damn straight, I force my children to do that. I make sure they watch what they eat constantly. I used to be 300 pounds. I'm not going to allow my children to live like that. Everyone's telling me that I'm a bad father for doing this, and I'm like, okay, no, I expect maximized genetic expression out of my children so that they can be healthy and not a liability to me later. No, thank you. They can take care of themselves, and that's what I'm doing. And that's what you need to do as parents to your INTP children. Because if you don't, they're going to be a burden on everybody. And then they're going to blame everyone else for them being a burden on everybody. And they're going to be really bitter. And then they're going to be creating logic bombs and destroying Uli Behringer's company randomly. Wow. Hypocrites. It's their own damn fault. Because they're stuck in their comfort zone and they're worshiping their god of dopamine, their little idol, the little idol that they can't live without, basically. Right? You can't do that. You can't do that. It's super unhealthy, folks. You can't do that for your children. But let's say you did it right. Let's say they were properly socialized and you'd help develop their FE inferior and they're insanely supportive, an amazingly supportive person, and they're very brilliant as a result. Let's say that you force them to make decisions and live with the consequences such that they have amazing perseverance and that they're very desirable, especially the opposite sex. And then all of a sudden, they're pretty healthy. They're productive member of society. They're no longer considered an involuntary celibate. They're very capable, and they could do so much more than everybody else, and they are so brilliant. And then all of a sudden, society moves forward, and then you have grandchildren. They're able to get past quarter-life crisis because they already understand their personal responsibility, because they know what is desirable and what is not, because they understand consequences, because you made them make decisions, right? And they won't have midlife crisis because people are actually showing them gratitude. Because people want to show them gratitude. Because people are appreciating them and giving them recognition, which they wouldn't have otherwise. That's important, folks. That's absolutely necessary. But there are a lot of people out there who don't even understand that concept. And it's really frustrating. It's insanely frustrating. But hey, they're not going to do that. And then they'll be there for you. You want a supportive INTP child. Having a supportive INTP child, they are insanely loyal to their parents. They will take care of you in your old age. They will be there for you when you have three-quarter life crisis and your final life crisis. It's great to have an INTP child in that way, but you have to raise them right. And I know you could just lazily leave them to their own devices, let them, and literally their devices, their Nintendo Switch, for example, and just let them do all that, and waste their life on Terraria or Starbound or Star Trek Online or World of Warcraft, right? Or EVE Online or Call of Duty. They always do this. Like, do you know how many times I've tried to hire high school age or college age INTPs as interns? Yeah, no, it wouldn't work because they're like, oh yeah, let's do it, and they agree to it, but then they put Call of Duty above me and this opportunity that I've given them. So I've given up on it. It's just like, wow, do you have any motivation, whatever? It's because they have to be forced to make decisions, and their parents weren't there for them to force them to make decisions. Because of that, they're very much set back in their life. Because, folks, they'll be unwise, and the only way they will be wise is if they suffer the consequences of their own actions. But INTPs are so stubborn that they choose to not act. That way they don't have to suffer consequences. So you have to force them to act so they do suffer consequences, because only through suffering consequences will your INTP children grow, because then they'll actually have the life experience to be an adult, a healthy adult. It's the only way. If you do not do this, you're bad parents. But if you do this, the rewards will be incredible. Elon Musk, for example, wow, look at how he turned out. Still even have to give some kudos to Bill Gates. Look at how he turned out, I guess. I'm not really a fan. You got Einstein out there. You know what I'm saying? Like Frank Herbert. Wow. You have plenty of INTPs out there who are absolute masters of what they do. But the only reason they are able to do that is because they found ways to contribute. They're well socialized, and they make decisions. They choose to sow so that they can reap. And then eventually they'll gain the wisdom to sow correctly so that they always reap good things instead of bad things. But a child, a teenager, they don't know how to do that. They need you, the parent, to be there for them. And if you want your INTP child to be successful in life, this is how you do it, folks. Bar none, this is how you do it. And I promise you that you will have the success you are looking for in your INTP child. If you found this lecture useful, helpful, educational, and or enlightening, please leave a comment below here in the membership section. It would be great to hear your feedback. And also, folks, thank you so much for being journeyman members with us. Anywho, folks, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys tonight.